All right, settle in. Let me tell you about the absolute insanity that was hiding secrets before you could just slap some encryption on a file and email it to Langley. You think password protection is annoying? You think two-factor authentication is a pain? Let me introduce you to the world of Cold War tradecraft, where hiding a single photograph required the skills of a jeweler, the patience of a saint, and occasionally the digestive system of a spy who really believed in the mission. My name's Daniel Morrison, and I spent the better part of the 1950s and 60s finding increasingly ridiculous ways to hide things from people who were very good at finding things. And before you ask, no, we didn't have cloud storage. We didn't even have clouds we trusted. We had rocks, coins, and in one particularly memorable case, a dead rat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the basic, because you need to understand just how primitive and simultaneously clever our methods were. The internet wouldn't exist for another 40 years. Hell, most of the technology you take for granted wouldn't be invented until I was already retired and wondering why my back hurt all the time. So, how did we hide secrets? Oh, let me count the ways, each one more elaborate and occasionally more disgusting than the last. Picture this. It's 1953, and I'm in a small apartment in Brooklyn. Yes, Brooklyn, because not all spy work happened overseas, meeting with a Soviet defector. This guy, let's call him Dmitri because his real name is still classified, and also I've forgotten it, has brought intelligence about Soviet nuclear research. Critically important stuff. The kind of information that could change the balance of Cold War. And how does he give it? Does he hand me a folder? Does he dictate it? Does he even write it down on regular paper? He hands me a nickel, 1/20th of a dollar. I'm standing there looking at this coin, thinking, Dmitri, buddy, I know defecting doesn't pay well, but I'm not hard up for loose change. Open it, he says in his heavy rush. Open. The nickel? Yes, you twist, is hollow. Inside is film, microfilm, very important. Now, I'd heard about hollow coins in training, but I'd never actually seen one. The concept is brilliant in its simplicity. You take a real coin, usually a nickel or a quarter because they're thick enough, and you machine out the interior, leaving a thin shell. Inside this shell, you can hide a microfilm negative about the size of your pinky nail. Then you seal it back up, and unless someone knows to look for it and knows exactly how to open it, it's just a coin. Loose change, something you'd drop in a tip jar without a second. I examine this nickel. It looks completely normal. Lincoln on one side, Monticello on the other. A bit worn, it's been in circulation. The weight feels wrong. If I hadn't known it was hollow, I'd have used it to buy a coffee and never thought. Dmitri shows me the trick. You press on one specific spot on the edge while twisting, and the coin separates into two halves. Inside, nestled in a tiny hollow, is a piece of microfilm maybe half an inch square. On this impossibly tiny film are photographed dozens of pages of documents. Soviet nuclear facility location, personnel list, the works. This is genius. His old technique? Dmitri. KGB does same thing. Everybody does hollow coins. Is spy off? And he was right. Hollow coins became so common in Cold War espionage that they were practically issued as standard equipment. The CIA's Technical Services Division, think of them as the Q branch from James Bond, except less glamorous and with worse coffee, manufactured thousands of these things. Hollow nickels, hollow quarters, hollow dimes. They even made hollow batteries, hollow bolts, hollow pins. If it was small and ordinary looking, someone in technical services had figured out how to hollow it out and hide something inside. But here's where it gets funny, and by funny, I mean occasionally disastrous. The problem with hollow coins is that they're still coins. They look like coins. They feel like coins. And if you're not careful, you accidentally spend them like coins. Let me tell you about Jerry. Jerry was a case officer in Berlin. Good guy, competent, but sometimes a bit scattered. Jerry had received a hollow nickel containing information about Soviet troop movements in East Germany, critical intelligence that needed to get back to headquarters immediately. Jerry put this nickel in his pocket for safekeeping while he conducted surveillance back to the safe house. On the way, he stopped at a kiosk to buy a newspaper, paid with a handful of change, including, you guessed it, the hollow nickel, the secret. By the time Jerry realized what he'd done, he was 3 blocks away. He sprinted back to the kiosk. The hollow nickel was already gone, either spent by the vendor or given his change to another customer. Jerry spent the next 6 hours hanging around that kiosk buying newspapers, magazines, candy, anything, paying with large bills and carefully examining every coin he got back as change, desperately hoping the hollow nickel would come back to him. Never did. Somewhere in Berlin, some random German citizen went home that evening with a nickel containing classified American intelligence about Soviet military positions. Maybe they discovered it and turned it in to authorities. Maybe they never noticed. And eventually, the nickel got melted down when Germany switched currency. We never found out. Jerry got a formal reprimand and a nickname that followed him the rest of his career. Loose Change Jerry. But the hollow coin technique, despite occasional mishap, was actually remarkably. It played a crucial role in one of the most famous spy cases of the Cold War, the arrest of Soviet spy Rudolf Abel in 1957. Abel, whose real name was William Fisher, but everybody called him Abel, was a Soviet intelligence officer operating in New York. He'd been running spy networks, collecting information, doing the whole espionage thing very successfully for years. The FBI knew there was a Soviet spy operating in New York, but couldn't identify him. Then, in 1953, a paperboy in Brooklyn, a kid delivering newspaper, received a nickel as payment from one of his customers. The kid dropped the nickel. It hit the pavement and split open. Inside was a piece of microfilm. The kid, being a smart kid, took it to the police. The police took it to the FBI. The FBI analyzed the microfilm and found coded Soviet intelligence communications. This one hollow coin, accidentally discovered through sheer bad luck, eventually led the FBI to Rudolf Abel. He was arrested in 1957 and later exchanged for U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers in that famous spy swap on the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin. All because a nickel hit the pavement. The irony wasn't lost on us in the intelligence community. We spent millions of dollars on sophisticated espionage technique, elaborate operation, cutting-edge technology, and one of the biggest Soviet spy cases was cracked because a paperboy dropped a nickel. After the Abel case, hollow coins became a bit less popular, too risky, too easily discovered by accident, but we kept using them in certain situations because they were just so damn convenient. Small, innocuous, easy to pass during a brush contact or dead drop. And if you were careful, unlike Loose Change Jerry, they worked beautifully. I still have one, actually, a hollow quarter from my operational days. Kept it as a souvenir after I retired. It's sitting in a drawer in my study empty, of course. I'm not hiding anything anymore except maybe my wife's birthday present, and that doesn't fit in a quarter. Sometimes I take it out and show it to my This is how Grandpa to do his. They look at this ordinary completely underwhelmed. They're growing up in a world where you can send encrypted messages instant. The idea of hiding something in a coin seems charmingly primitive to them. And you know what? It is primitive. It worked. For decades worked. And unlike your cloud store, nobody could hack a hollow coin from. They had to physically get their hands on it first. Though apparently sometimes all it took dropping it on. Now let's talk about one of the most ingenious hiding methods ever devised, the microdot. If hollow coins were clever, microdots were absolute wizardry. Here's the concept. You take a document, could be a letter, could be a photograph, could be a schematic of a Soviet weapons facility, and you photograph it. Then you photograph the photograph. Then you photograph that photograph. You keep re-photographing, reducing it each time, until you've got an image so small it's basically microscopic. We're talking smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. Then you take this tiny, tiny image, the micro, and you hide it. You glue it over a period in an otherwise innocent letter. You stick it under a post-it. You embed it. To the naked eye, it's invisible. But under a microscope, it's an entire document. Perfectly readable. This technology was developed by the Germans before World War II, and by the Cold War era, everybody was using it. The Soviets loved microdots. We loved microdots. The British loved microdots. It was like the universal language of espionage. Hide your secrets in dots so small you needed a microscope to read them. Let me tell you about my first experience with microdots, because it perfectly encapsulates both how brilliant and how absolutely maddening this technology was. It's 1955, and I'm in Vienna working a Soviet source, a clerk in a military administration office who's passing us information about troop deployments. He's been giving us documents for months, but it's always risky. He has to smuggle papers out of his office, photograph them, return the originals before anyone notices they're missing. It's time-consuming and dangerous, so we train him in microdot technology. We give him a special camera, and when I say special, I mean this thing was a marvel of 1950s engineering. It looked like a cigarette light, an actual cigarette lighter that you could use to light cigarettes, but hidden inside was a tiny camera with a microscopic lens that could photograph documents and reduce them to microdot size. Brilliant, right? Our source could now photograph documents in seconds, create microdots, and pass them to us hidden in innocent correspondence. No more smuggling full-size document. No more risky photo sessions in dark rooms. Just snap a picture, create the dot, stick it on a postcard, mail it to a dead drop address. Easy, except it wasn't easy, because creating microdots required chemistry, precision, and patience, and our source had none of those qualities. The first letter we received from him after the microdot training was a cheerful postcard from Vienna showing St. Stephen's Cathedral, very tourist, very innocent, supposedly had a microdot hidden under the postage stamp containing important. I carefully, delicately removed the stamp, examined it under our microscope, found the microdot exactly where it was supposed to be. Perfect. I positioned it under the high-powered lens, adjusted the focus, and prepared to read the intelligence. The microdot was blank, completely blank. Our source had perfectly executed every step of the process except one. He forgot to remove the lens cap when taking the photograph. We had to send a coded message back. Product received. Technical issue. Please resend. We couldn't say, "You forgot to remove the lens cap, you magnificent idiot," because that would be too specific and potentially compromising if the message was intercepted. The second attempt was better. The microdot was not blank. It contained a photograph. Unfortunately, the photograph was of our source's thumb because he'd accidentally put his thumb over the lens while taking the picture. The third attempt was almost perfect. The document was photographed correctly, reduced to microdot size properly, placed under the stamp correctly. I extracted it, examined it under the microscope, and discovered I couldn't read it. The text was blurry. Our source had moved the camera while taking the photograph, creating just enough motion blur to render the text illegible. By the fourth attempt, I was ready to recommend we go back to full-size document photography. But the fourth attempt worked. Clear, readable, perfect. Our source had finally met for about 2. Then he sent us a postcard with not one, but 7 microdots, hidden in various locations. Under the stamp were periods in the text, one stuck to the back of. It was like he'd gotten so excited about the technology that he couldn't stop making microdots. We spent an hour examining this postcard under the microscope, extracting every tiny dot, cataloging. 3 of the 7 microdots were duplicate. The same document photographed 3 times. 2 were photographs completely irrelevant administrative memos about office. 1 was a photograph of what appeared to be his lunch, and 1, just 1, was actually useful intelligence. This was the reality of Cold War tradecraft. Brilliant technology in the hands of people who were usually not trained technicians, operating under stress, trying to remember complex procedures while maintaining their cover identities, and not getting caught by counterintelligence. But when microdots worked, when everything went right, they were incredible. I once received intelligence from a source in Moscow, hidden in a microdot so small it was placed over the dot of an I in a typed letter. The letter was about family matters, completely innocuous, but that one dot contained photographs of 20 pages of classified Soviet documents. 20 pages, in a dot smaller than a grain of sand. The person who intercepted and read that letter. Soviet censors opened and read all mail coming from Moscow. Everyone knew this, would have seen nothing unusual. Just a letter from a Russian citizen to a distant relative discussing family news and weather. They'd have held the physical paper containing intelligence that could influence Cold War policy, and they'd have seen nothing. That's the beauty of microdots. They didn't just hide information. They hid it in such a way that people looking directly at it couldn't see it. It was hiding in the most literal sense, making something invisible. The Technical Services Division got very creative with microdot placement. I saw microdots hidden under postage stamps, classic, over periods in typed letters, very common, in the spine of a matchbook, clever, under the label on a bottle of wine, sophisticated, inside a walnut shell that had been carefully cracked open, hollowed out, and glued back together, borderline insane, embedded in a dead fly that was then pressed into a book, I'm not making this up, inside a fake mole that was glued to someone's face. I really wish I was making this up. That last one needs explanation. There was an operation in East Berlin where an agent needed to pass microdots during a face-to-face meeting in a public place, but the meeting was being surveilled and we couldn't risk a traditional brush pass or dead drop. So someone, I don't know who, but they were either a genius or a lunatic, came up with the idea of fake moles. The agent would wear a fake mole on his face, like a beauty mark, but raised and textured to look like a real mole. Hidden inside this mole was a microdot. He'd meet the contact, they'd shake hands, and during the handshake, he'd scratch his face near the mole, dislodging it slightly. Later, in private, he'd remove the fake mole and extract the microdot. The operation worked. But imagine being that agent, walking around East Berlin with a fake mole glued to your face containing classified intelligence, praying that A, nobody noticed the mole looked fake, B, the glue held, but not too well, C, you didn't accidentally scratch it off at the wrong moment, and praying that you wouldn't end up in CIA training man, as the example of tradecraft that technically worked but attempted. The microdot technology continued to evolve throughout the Cold War. By the 1960s, we had better cameras, better chemistry, better techniques. The microdots got smaller, clearer, more reliable. Some of them were so small you literally couldn't see them, even if you knew exactly. But that created its own problem. Sometimes we couldn't find them either. I remember one incident where we received a letter that supposedly contained a microdot with critical intelligence. The source had been very specific in his coded message. Product in the usual letter. Check carefully. We checked. We examined every millimeter of that letter under the microscope. Every period, every comma, every speck of dust, every fiber in the paper. We spent 3 hours looking for that microdot. Never found it. Either the source forgot to include it, or it fell off during transit, or we missed it despite our careful search, or possibly it was so small even our microscopes couldn't detect it, and it's still there, hiding in that letter, which is filed away in some archive somewhere, an eternal mystery. That was the risk with microdots. They were so small and so well hidden that sometimes were too well hidden. But compared to what came before, smuggling full documents, risky photograph sessions, courier dead drops, microdots were revolutionary. You could hide entire libraries of information in spaces so small they were essentially invisible. And unlike your cloud storage, which can be hacked from anywhere in the world, microdots required physical access. Someone had to physically obtain the document, know where the microdot was hidden, extract it, and examine it under proper magnification. It was analog security in the most literal sense. So I'll admit, the fake mole thing was probably taking it too far. Okay, let's talk about dead drop, because the name alone is wonderfully ominous, and the reality is somehow both more boring. First, terminology. A dead drop can leave something for someone else to you ever meet. Think of it like those little free library boxes you see in neighborhood, except instead of books, it's classified intelligence, and instead of being wholesome community sharing, it's international espionage. The advantage of dead drops is that they're secure from surveillance. If you and your source never meet, then surveillance teams can't photograph you together. They can't prove you're in contact. Even if they're watching both of you, they'd need to be watching the exact right place at the exact right time to catch the dead drop. The disadvantage is that you're hiding things in public places and hoping they're still there when the other person comes to collect them, which doesn't always work out. Let me tell you about some of my favorite, and by favorite I mean most problematic, dead drop locations. The Loose Brick Dead Drop, Washington, D.C., 1956. This was supposed to be simple. There was a wall in Rock Creek Park, old stone wall, probably been there since the 1800s. One brick was slightly loose. You could pull it out, revealing a cavity behind it, perfect for hiding things. Classical dead drop location. We'd used it for years. I had to leave a payment for a source, $500 in cash, which in 1956 was serious money. I went to the park at 2 a.m. Pabiyam. Dead drops are always serviced in the middle of the night because apparently we all agreed that looking suspicious at 2 a.m. was better than looking suspicious during daylight hours. Found the wall, found the brick, pulled it out, placed the envelope with the cash inside, replaced. Perfect textbook trade credit. The source was supposed to pick up the money the next night. He came back 2 nights later, frantic. The money was gone. We investigated. Turned out the Park Service had chosen that exact week to repair old walls in Rock Creek Park. They'd removed a bunch of loose bricks, including ours, fixed the wall, and in the process had found an envelope containing $500. Being honest government employees, they turned it into the lost and found. So, somewhere in the Park Service administrative offices, there was a log entry reading, "Found, envelope containing $500 cash. Location, inside wall cavity in Rock Creek Park. Time, 3 a.m. The source never got his payment. We couldn't claim the money because that would require explaining why we'd hidden $500 inside a wall in a public park at 2 a.m., and we had to find a new dead drop location because the wall had been repaired and there were no more loose. The Park Service probably spent weeks wondering about the mysterious wall cache. Maybe they thought it was mob money. Maybe they thought someone was robbing banks and stashing the loot. Never would have guessed it was espionage related. The Hollow Tree Dead Drop, Virginia, 1957. Classic location. A large oak tree with a hollow at the base. Perfect for natural, inconspicuous, easily described in instructions. Third tree past the bridge, hollow on south side. Worked great for months. Then someone put a beehive in. I don't mean someone deliberately sabotaged our dead drop by installing bees. I mean actual bees decided that hollow was perfect for a hive and moved in. Nature reclaimed our dead drop location. The first person to discover this was our source, who reached into the hollow to deposit documents and got stung about 15 times. He dropped the documents and ran, leaving them in the hollow with the increasingly aggressive bees. I came to collect the documents the next night, unaware of the bee situation. Reached in, felt something fuzzy and vibrating, and in the split second before the first sting, thought, this doesn't feel like papers. Got stung 7 times before I gave up and ran. The documents stayed with the bees. We eventually hired a professional beekeeper to remove the hive. We told him we were park rangers concerned about public safety, which was technically true if you consider public to mean intelligence officers and safety to mean not getting stung while conducting espionage. Retrieved the documents, which were covered in honey and partially chewed by bees, but mostly legible. Found a new dead drop location, one without wildlife. The public bathroom dead drop. New York, 1958. Someone had the bright idea of using the toilet tank in a public bathroom as a dead drop. You'd open the tank, tape a waterproof package to the inside of the lid, close it up. The next person would come, check the tank, retrieve the package. Invisible, secure, private, except public bathrooms get cleaned and sometimes repaired. A plumber doing maintenance discovered our waterproof package taped inside a toilet tank. Being a responsible citizen, he assumed it was drugs and called the police. The police opened the package and found not drugs but documents in Russian with photographs of U.S. military facility. This triggered a major investigation. The FBI staked out that bathroom for weeks, waiting for someone to come back for them. Meanwhile, we'd gotten word that the drop was compromised and abandoned it. Nobody ever came back. The FBI eventually concluded it was an abandoned Soviet dead drop and stopped the surveillance. But for months, that bathroom in Midtown Manhattan was the most watched restroom in America. Foreign intelligence services had no idea why the FBI was so interested in that particular bathroom. Probably generated a lot of confusing intelligence. Americans conducting extensive surveillance on public toilet. Purpose unclear. Possible new technology? The cemetery dead drop. Philadelphia, 1959. Cemeteries make excellent dead drops. Lots of visual markers, gravestones with names and dates, usually quiet. People visiting at odd hours aren't that unusual. And most importantly, nobody digs in cemeteries except for official purpose. We had a dead drop behind a particular gravestone, Martha Henderson, 1847 and 1923, beloved wife and mother, may she rest. Behind Martha's stone was a small hollow where we'd leave and collect materials. Worked perfectly until Martha's great-great-grandson decided to visit the grave and noticed the ground behind the stone looked disturbed. Being a dutiful descendant, he assumed vandals were messing with his ancestor's grave. He called the cemetery administration to complain. The cemetery sent someone to investigate. They found our dead drop hollow and, not knowing what it was, assumed it was indeed vandals or possibly grave robbers planning. They filled in the hollow and placed a security camera aimed at that section of the cemetery. Discovered the camera when our source went to service the dead drop and noticed the very obvious security camera pointed directly at Martha Henderson's grave. He wisely did not approach the grave, did not service the drop, and sent an emergency message. Drop compromised. Camera abort. We had to abandon poor Martha Henderson's grave as a dead drop. Somewhere in cemetery security footage, there's probably video of various intelligence officers walking past Martha's grave, noticing the camera, and quickly walking away looking totally. The fake rock dead drop, various locations. This was CIA Technical Services' pride and joy. Artificial, exactly like real rocks, but were hollow inside. Placed in a park or a trail, and they'd blend in perfectly the surrounding rocks. Open them up, and there was a cavity inside for hiding document equipment. The fake rocks were impressive. They were molded from real rock, painted to match local geology, weathered to look natural. Unless you picked one up, you'd never know it was fake. The problem started when people did pick them. Kids throw rocks. This is a universal. Kids see rocks. Kids throw. We lost several fake rock dead drops because children picked them up and threw them, and they made a weird hollow sound when they hit the ground, and the kids investigated and discovered the hollow interior. Dogs also have opinions about rock. Dogs pee on rock. This is another universal truth. We had one fake rock dead drop that became a popular marking spot for every dog in the neighborhood. Nobody wanted to service that dead drop. It's your turn to pick up the package from the P-Rock became an assignment nobody wanted. Landscapers also interact with rocks. They move them, rearrange them, sometimes remove them entirely when redesigning spaces. We'd place a fake rock carefully in one location, come back 2 days later, and it would be gone, moved by a well-meaning landscaper who was just trying to make the park look nicer. One fake rock dead drop in Berlin was accidentally loaded into a truck during street repair. Workers were moving rocks from one area to another as part of road work. Our fake rock got scooped up with a bunch of real rocks and dumped in a different location. We spent a week searching for it. We knew it was somewhere in a 3-block radius, but we couldn't exactly go around examining every rock in broad daylight. Eventually found it in a decorative rock garden outside an East German government building, which was possibly the worst place it could have ended up. Despite these mishaps, dead drops remained one of our most reliable methods for passing material. When they worked, and usually they allowed communication between agents without the risk of meetings, and they forced surveillance teams to watch hundreds of potential locations simultaneously, which was resource-intensive and often impossible. But the failures and education, every failed dead drop taught us something about human behavioral process or unexpected circumstance. For instance, we learned always check for bee activity before using hollow trees. Always account for maintenance schedules when using facilities. Never use locations that might attract children or dogs. And for the love of all that's holy, coordinate with other government agencies so you don't hide things in places that are about to undergo construction. Or as we used to say, a dead drop is only dead until the Park Service repairs it. Kids throw it, dogs mark it, or someone decides to put a beehive in it. Not as catchy as some spy movie quotes, but considerably more accurate. Let's talk about invisible ink, because this is where Cold War tradecraft got genuinely weird and occasionally resulted in people accidentally poisoning themselves. You've probably seen invisible ink in spy movies. Someone writes a message, it's invisible, then they apply heat or special chemicals, and the message appears. Very dramatic, very cool. The reality was actually pretty similar to the movies, except messier, less reliable, and sometimes mildly. There were dozens of invisible ink forms in use during the Cold War. Some were based on common household chemicals. Some required specialist chemistry. All of them required more patience and precision than most. Let me walk you through some of the formulas we used. Lemon juice, the classic. Yes, actual lemon juice. You write with lemon juice, either with a pen dipped in juice or with a cotton swab or toothpick. Let it dry completely invisible. Then reveal the message in heat. The lemon juice caramelizes and turns brown, making the text visible. Advantages: completely innocuous. If you're caught with a bottle of lemon juice, nobody suspects espionage. They think you really like lemonade. Disadvantages: unreliable. Sometimes it doesn't work well. Sometimes it works too well, and the message is visible even without heat. Sometimes it smells like lemons, is nice, but also potentially suspicious. And if you're writing in a hotel room, you're going to attract fruit flies. I used lemon juice invisible ink exactly once in 1954. Wrote a message on the back of a postcard, let it dry, mailed it to a contact. The contact was supposed to heat it gently to reveal them. He used a cigarette lighter, got impatient, applied too much heat. The postcard caught fire. He managed to put out the fire before destroying the whole thing, but about half the message was burned away. What remained read, burned section, meeting canceled, burned section, danger, burned section, love, Daniel. The contact thought I was either canceling a meeting due to danger or confessing my love for him, possibly both. Took 3 more messages to clarify that I was neither in danger nor romantically interested, just a victim of over-enthusiastic heat up. Never used lemon juice, invisible ink again. Milk, slightly more reliable classic, similar to lemon juice but using milk. Write with milk, let dry, high heat. Works slightly better than lemon juice. Disadvantages. You're walking around with milk, which requires refrigeration, which you might not have. Unrefrigerated milk in your pocket or bag starts to smell after a few hours. Also, milk attracts ants. I learned this the hard way. Urine, the "I can't believe this actually works" formula. Yes, urine. Human urine contains urea and other compounds make it work as invisible ink. You collect it, not dwell on the collection process. Write with it, let it dry. Apply heat to reveal. Advantages, always available. Never need to purchase supplies. Difficult to trace. Disadvantages, everything else. I never personally used urine as invisible ink, but I knew officers who did in emergency situations when they had no other. Their universal reaction, it worked. At what cost? Cobalt chloride, the proper chemistry approach. Now we're getting into the specialist formulas. Cobalt chloride dissolved in water creates an invisible ink that becomes blue when exposed to humidity. Much more reliable than lemon juice or milk. The CIA supplied this in small bottles disguised as aspirin bottles or medicine. You'd add a tiny amount to water, write with it, let it dry complete. To reveal, you'd either heat it or expose it to steam. This actually worked pretty well. I used cobalt chloride invisible ink for several operations in the late 50s. Never had a message fail to develop properly. The only problem? Cobalt chloride is mildly toxic. You weren't supposed to get it on your skin. Definitely weren't supposed to ingest it. And you had to be very careful storing it in aspirin bottles that you didn't accidentally take it as aspirin. We received a safety memo in 1957 after an officer in Paris accidentally took his invisible ink instead of his actual. He was fine. Apparently the dose wasn't high enough to cause serious harm, but he spent a very uncomfortable evening and filed a complaint that his invisible ink and his aspirin bottles were too similarly labeled. Phenolphthalein, the one that sounds like disease. This was another chemistry-based formula. Phenolphthalein solution is colorless, but turns pink when exposed to base alkaline solution. You'd write with the phenolphthalein solution invisible. Let it dry. To develop the message, you'd expose it to alkaline vapor. We usually used ammonia vapor, household ammonia. The message would turn pink. Worked beautifully, very reliable, clear, easy to read results. The problem? Ammonia vapor smells terrible. You're sitting in a hotel room waving a postcard over an open bottle of ammonia, trying to develop the invisible message while also trying not to pass out from the fumes. Your eyes are watering, your nose is burning. You're wondering if intelligence was really worth level of suffering. And if anyone enters the room, you're sitting there with ammonia and postcard and pink writing appearing like magic, looking like you're either conducting espionage, correct, or performing some kind of bizarre chemical experiment, also correct. The double message technique. Here's where it got clever. You'd write an innocent message in regular ink and then write a secret message between the lines in invisible ink. For example, the visible message might read, "Dear Aunt Martha, hope you are feeling better. The weather here has been lovely. I visited the museum yesterday and saw some wonderful painting. The food at the hotel restaurant is quite good. Love, Herbert." Completely boring. Exactly the kind of letter a tourist would write. But between those lines, written in invisible ink, would be actual intelligence. Soviet official willing to defect stop requires extraction. Vienna stop timeline urgent, stop-await instructions. The person intercepting and reading the mail would see the boring tourist letter and pass it along. Our contact would receive it, develop the invisible ink, and read the actual message. This worked well until people started getting creative and writing messages were too boring, which actually made them suspicious. There was one officer who wrote cover messages so incredibly dull that counterintelligence officers started reading them specifically because nobody could possibly be that boring unless they were hiding something. His messages were things like, "The carpet in my hotel room is beige. There are 47 tiles on the bathroom floor. I counted them. The curtains. I enjoy beige." Counterintelligence started developing all his letters with every known invisible ink method, convinced someone writing about extensively. Turns out he wasn't. He was just really boring and beige, but his cover message suspicious in their banality. His actual invisible ink messages, including, almost got discovered multiple times. He got a memo from headquarters. "Please write more interesting cover messages. Your extreme boredom is attracting attention." The invisible ink disaster in Prague, 1959. Let me tell you about a spectacular invisible ink failure that's become legendary in CIA circles. An officer in Prague, we'll call him Tom, was using invisible ink to communicate with a Czech source. The formula required the source to heat the paper to develop the message. Simple enough. The source received the letter, took it home, wanted to read the secret. He knew he needed to apply heat. Did he use a gentle candle flame or a warm iron like he'd been trained? No. He put the letter in his oven at 400 degrees because he wanted to make sure it worked. The paper not only developed the invisible ink method, it also browned, curled, and partially burned. The text was visible, but so was the fact that this paper had been baked like a cookie. The source panicked, realized the letter now looked obviously suspicious, and tried to flatten it out and make it look normal again. This didn't work. The letter looked like it had been through a fire. Then his wife came home, saw the burned letter, and asked what he was doing. "Making toast," he said, which made no sense, given that he was holding a letter and there was no bread involved. His wife, being a sensible woman, concluded her husband was having some kind of breakdown and called their doctor. The doctor arrived, examined the burned letter, which still had the visible secret message, and being an astute individual, realized this was not a medical emergency, probably an intelligence matter. Being a patriotic Czech citizen in Soviet-controlled Czechoslovakia, he called the authorities. The source was arrested. Tom had to conduct an emergency extraction of several other assets who might be compromised. The entire Prague network was disrupted for months, all because someone used an oven instead of a candle flame. After that incident, training materials were updated to include very specific instructions. Apply gentle heat. Do not use ovens, stoves, or any heating element above 200 degrees. If you are considering using your kitchen appliances to develop invisible ink, please reconsider your life choices. The evolution and end of invisible ink. By the 1960s, invisible ink was becoming less popular. The methods were too finicky, too unreliable, too dependent on people following instructions correctly, which, as Prague proved, was not guaranteed. We shifted to microdots, miniaturized cameras, other methods that didn't require chemistry experiments in hotel rooms. But invisible ink had its moment. For decades, it was a primary method for covert communication. Thousands of messages were written, dried, mailed, and developed. Most of them worked. Some of them failed spectacularly. A few of them resulted in people accidentally poisoning themselves, setting things on fire. It was primitive technology, using chemistry, but it was effective. And it had one major advantage over digital encryption. You can't hack a message written in lemon juice. You can intercept it, but if you don't know to develop it, it's just a blank piece of paper or a boring letter about beige carpets. Though I'll admit, the urine thing was probably taking it too far. Some tradecraft methods should remain theoretical. All right, let's talk about secret compartment, because Cold War intelligence officers became absolute masters at hiding things inside other things. If it existed, someone in technical services figured out how to hollow it out and put secrets inside. We've already covered hollow coins, but coins were just the beginning. The creativity and occasionally absurdity of Cold War concealment method is something you have to experience to believe. The hollow bolt. This was genius in its simplicity. You take a regular bolt, the kind you'd use in construction machinery, and you machine out the interior, making it hollow. From the outside, it looks exactly like a regular bolt. Weight is right, threading is functional, everything appears normal. Inside you can hide microfilm, microdots, small amounts of currency rolled up tight, whatever fits. The beauty of the hollow bolt is that you can hide it in plain sight. Leave it in a pocket, keep it in a toolbox. If someone finds it, they see a bolt. Not so, even if they're specifically searching for concealment devices, unless they know exactly what to look for and physically disassemble the bolt, they won't find the secret compartment. We used hollow bolts extensively in the 50s and 60s. They were perfect for dead drops. Leave the bolt in a specific location. Recipient picks it up, looks like they're just picking up a piece of hardware. And for carrying materials across borders, keep it in a pocket with other hardware. Customs officials see ordinary bolts. I carried a hollow bolt for years, had it in my pocket during dozens of operations. Never once was it discovered or questioned. It just looked like I was the kind of guy who carried random hardware, which apparently was not suspicious in the 1950s. The bolt is probably still in a box somewhere in my garage, empty now. But for a while, that bolt contained secrets that would have caused serious international incidents if discovered. The hollowed-out book classic spy stuff. Take a book, carefully cut out the interior pages, create a cavity, use it to hide documents, money, small equipment. Close the book, and it looks like a book. Put it on a shelf with other books, and it's invisible. The CIA Technical Services Division produced hundreds of hollowed-out books. They'd select boring titles, usually technical manuals, agricultural textbooks, things nobody would want to read, hollow them out, and give them to field office. I had a hollowed-out copy of Industrial Applications of Soil Management that I used for storing operational materials in my Vienna apartment. 784 pages about dirt, or rather 50 pages about dirt. The front and back sections were real, and a big hollow in the middle containing code books, one-time pads, and emergency contact. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was going to pick up that book and read it. It was the perfect hiding place. The only problem, you had to remember which books were hollow and which were real. I made the mistake once of trying to reference something in a legitimate book I owned, only to discover I'd accidentally grabbed the hollow book instead. Opened it up looking for information about Viennese architecture, found classified code books. Very confusing moment until I realized my error. Hollow books worked great until you encountered someone who actually shared your supposed interest in boring technical subjects. There was an officer in Berlin who had a hollow copy of Advanced Principle Mixing. Perfect cover. Nobody reads about concrete mixing, except he got talking to an East German civil engineer at a reception. The engineer was genuinely interested, started asking modern techniques. The officer, trying to maintain his cover as someone interested in concrete, had to pretend he'd read this book he'd never actually read, because the interior pages had been cut out and replaced with a spy camera. He tried to bluff his way through the conversation, failed miserably. The engineer walked away thinking Americans knew nothing about concrete mixing accurate, and possibly wondering why someone would claim to be interested in a subject they clearly knew nothing. Cover may be compromised. Recommend avoiding concrete-themed in future. The fake. This was clever. You take a regular D-cell battery, the big cylindrical ones, and you create a perfect replica that looks and feels exactly like a real battery, but is actually hollow. These fake batteries were remarkably good. They had the right weight, achieved by adding metal weights to the hollow interior, the right markings, the right feel. You could put one in a flashlight alongside real batteries and nobody would notice the difference. Well, nobody would notice unless they actually used the flashlight, at which point they'd discover that one of the batteries wasn't producing any electricity, full of microfilm instead of chemical energy. This led to some unfortunate situations where people tried to use flashlights that didn't work because half the batteries were fake. I remember one operation in East Berlin where an officer needed to use his flashlight to read a dead drop location in the dark. He'd been carrying fake batteries mixed with real ones, turned on the flashlight, nothing. Changed the batteries. Still nothing. Tried different combinations. Eventually got it working with the one genuine battery he had, by which point he'd spent 15 minutes fumbling around in the dark looking suspicious as hell. He completed the operation successfully but filed a complaint. Request technical services clearly mark fake battery. Current system of guess which ones work is suboptimal. The hollowed out heel shoe heels could be hollowed out to create secret compartment. You'd carefully remove the heel, hollow it out, store materials inside, replace them. From the outside, completely normal shoes. This worked great in theory. In practice, it made your shoes wear unevenly, created a weird sound when you walked, and occasionally the heel would come loose at inappropriate moments. There's a famous story, probably apocryphal, but I choose to believe it's true, about an officer conducting a meeting with a source in a Moscow cafe. The meeting was going well. Intelligence was being passed. Everything was professional and covert. Then the officer's hollowed-out heel fell off his shoe, just detached completely, rolled across the floor and broke open, spilling microfilm and emergency currency across the cafe floor. Both the officer and the source just stared at the heel and its contents for a moment. Then, in a remarkable display of improvisation, the source laughed loudly and said in Russian, "Shoes, always falling apart. Here, let me help you." He quickly gathered everything, stuffed it back into the heel, handed it to the officer, and they both left the cafe quickly before anyone examined too closely what had fallen out of the shoe. That officer apparently had nightmares about shoe heels for years afterwards. I blame him. The fake rock revisited. We talked about fake rock dead drops, but fake rocks had another use: personal concealment. You could carry a hollow fake rock with you. If you needed to hide something quickly, you'd put it in the rock, place the rock somewhere ordinary, and come back for it later. Sounds good, right? The problem is that carrying a rock around is weird. People notice when you're carrying rocks. They ask questions like, "Why do you have a rock?" And "Where did you get that rock?" And "Are you okay? Should I call someone?" I tried carrying a hollow fake rock during an operation in Austria. Put it in my jacket. The pocket immediately sagged from the weight. The rock-shaped bulge was very obvious. I looked like I was smuggling actual rock, which is not a common smuggling activity and therefore suspicious. Switched to carrying it in a bag. Better, but now I had a bag with just a rock in. If anyone asked to see what was in my bag, I'd have to show them a rock. How do you explain carrying a single rock in a bag? I'm a geologist. You're a cultural attaché. I have geological hobbies. The fake rock ended up being more trouble than it was worth. Went back to using hollow coins and bolts, which at least you could carry without looking like a rock. The hollowed-out cane for older officers or anyone who could plausibly use a walking stick. Hollowed-out canes were excellent concealment. The cane was functional. It actually supported weight, but the interior was hollow and could store rolled documents, film, or other materials. I used a hollowed-out cane during one operation when I was playing an older, slightly infirm American businessman. The cane added authenticity to my cover and provided excellent concealment. The only issue, I was in my 30s and perfectly healthy. Had to remember to actually use the cane, to limp consistently, to maintain the appearance of needing it. This was harder than it sounds. Forget you're walking normally, remember you'll be using a cane, then overcorrect and limp too much, then someone asks if you need medical attention. Maintaining a physical cover is exhausting. By the end of that operation, I was almost to give up the cane and walk normally again, even though the cane had been an excellent concealment device. The fake dog waist, I'm not joking. Okay, this is where Cold War tradecraft ventured into territory that makes you question everyone's judgment. Someone, I don't know who, but they should have been stopped, developed a fake dog waist concealment device. It looked exactly like dog feet. You could hollow it out, store materials inside, and leave it on the ground as a dead drop. The theory was that nobody would pick it up. Nobody would examine it. It was the perfect hiding place because humans have a strong aversion to touching feces. The practice was, well, it technically worked, but at cost. I never personally used the fake dog waist, but I knew officers who did. Their universal report, it works, but you feel terrible about yourself while doing it. There was apparently an incident in Vienna where an officer left a fake dog waist dead drop in a park. The contact was supposed to pick it up, wearing gloves, obviously. Before the contact arrived, a very civic-minded Austrian citizen saw the dog waist, was offended that someone hadn't cleaned up after their dog, and disposed of it properly in a trash can. The contact arrived, no fake dog waist, and filed a report. Dead drop not serviced or already collected. Please confirm status. The officer had to respond. Dead drop was disposed of by responsible citizen. Recommend different location for future operation. The fake dog waist concealment device quietly. Some method, effective, were perhaps too unpleasant for regular operational use. The hidden compartment in ordinary object. Technical services also created secret compartments in everyday items. Batteries, covered pens, hollow barrel, cigarette lighters, hollow base, lipstick tubes, fake lipstick, hollow interior, talcum powder containers, false bottom, soda cans before pull tabs. When cans had to be opened with can openers, the top was fake and came off to reveal interior. Eyeglass cases, false bottom, pipes, tobacco pipes with hollow stems, belt buckles, hollow interior, accessed by unscrewing. The variety was impressive. Literally anything you might carry could potentially be a concealment device. This made counterintelligence work incredibly difficult. How do you search for when it could be hidden in any of dozens of ordinary objects? But it also created paranoia. You start examining everything suspicious. Is this pen just a pen? Is this battery real? Belt buckle open? You become suspicious of ordinary objects, which is probably not great for your mental health. Why we needed all these methods? You might wonder why so many different concealment methods. Why not just pick the best one and use it consistently? Because counterintelligence was smart and adaptive. Once they caught someone using hollow coins, they started checking all coins. Once they discovered hollowed-out books, they started examining books. We had to constantly vary our methods, rotate through different techniques, stay unpredictable. It was an arms race of concealment and discovery. We'd develop a new method, use it successfully for months or years, then counterintelligence would discover it, and we'd need something new. Some methods got burned and became useless. Others remained effective for decades. The ones that lasted longest were the ones that exploited human psychology. People don't want to touch dog waste. People don't carefully examine every bolt they see. People don't read boring books about concrete mixing. The best concealment weren't necessarily the most technically sophisticated. They were the ones that understood human behavior and exploited the fact that most people aren't looking for secrets in ordinary objects. Though I'll maintain that the fake dog waste a bridge too far. Some things shouldn't be concealment devices, regardless of effectiveness. All right, let's talk about encryption. Not your fancy digital encryption with algorithms and key length. I'm talking about one-time pass, the theoretically unbreakable encryption method that was also the most tedious, frustrating thing you'd ever use. Here's how one-time pass. You have a pad of paper with pages of random numbers. Your contact has an identical pad with the exact same numbers in the exact same order. You both keep these pads absolutely secure because if anyone else gets a copy, your entire communication system is compromised. To send a message, you convert your message to numbers, A01, B02, etc. Then, add the numbers from your one-time pad to your message number. Send the resulting gibberish. The recipient subtracts their one-time pad numbers, which match yours, gets the original message. Then, and this is critical, you destroy the page of the pad both of you tear it out, burn it, make sure it's completely gone, because you can never use the same pad page twice. That's why it's called one time. Most does fast water. If you follow all these rules perfectly, the encryption is mathematically unbreakable. Even with infinite computing power, an enemy can't decrypt your message without the one-time pad. In practice? Oh boy. The problem with human memory. First problem, you had to remember which page you were on. Sounds simple? Was not simple. You'd use page 47 to encrypt a message. You were supposed to tear out page 47 and burn it. Then next time, you'd use page 48. Simple sequence, except you're operating under stress, maybe you're tired, maybe it's 3 a.m., and you've been awake for 20 hours. You encrypt a message using page 48. Then you forget whether you destroyed page 48 or page 47. Or maybe you destroyed both. Or maybe you destroyed neither. And now you can't remember. If you and your contact get out of sync, if you're using different pages, your messages become undecryptable garbage. And you won't know you're out of sync until your contact sends back a message saying, "Unable to decrypt, check pad number." Then you have to figure out where things went wrong, resynchronize, and hope you didn't compromise security. I once got pages of sync progs, 2 weeks of careful coordination, figure out what went wrong and get back in sync. 2 weeks of essentially no communication. One time didn't. The problem with arithmetic. Second problem, the actual encryption process involved a lot of arithmetic. You're adding numbers, sometimes carrying digits, writing everything down carefully so you don't make mistakes. This seems straightforward until you're doing it at 2 a.m. in a cold hotel room with inadequate lighting and your hands are shaking from stress or cold or both. You make an arithmetic error, just one digit wrong. The recipient can't decrypt the message. Or worse, they decrypt it, but it's gibberish because one number is off and now they don't know if the message is compromised, if you made a mistake, or if something else went wrong. I made arithmetic errors constantly. Everyone did. It was so common that we developed a system of checksums, extra numbers at the end of messages that let you verify whether the encryption was done correctly. But that added more numbers, which meant more arithmetic, which meant more opportunities for errors. One officer in Berlin became infamous for his terrible arithmetic. He'd encrypt messages, send them, they'd be undecryptable. He'd decrypt incoming messages, get gibberish. His handler eventually sent him a message, carefully encrypted with triple-checked arithmetic, just said, "Take remedial math course, stop current error rate unacceptable, stop." The officer took offense and responded with predictably error-filled encryption with what he intended to be a professional defense of his abilities. His handler received Jurg Vienmop Skiot Wida, which either meant nothing or possibly was an ancient. They eventually assigned someone else to handle his encryption. The problem with destruction. Third problem, you had to completely destroy used pad pages, tear them out, just throw them away, completely destroy them so they couldn't possibly be reconstructed. The standard method, burn them. Watch them burn completely. Make sure every bit turns to ash, then crush the ashes, then dispose of the ashes in a way that they can't be recovered. Excessive? Maybe. But counterintelligence teams would literally go through your trash looking for partially burned pages. If they found fragments of your one-time, they could potentially decrypt your messages. So you became very careful about burning. You'd burn pad pages in a metal container, make sure they burned completely, then crush the ashes into powder, then flush the ashes down the toilet or scatter them out or dispose of them in 6 different trash cans. This process took time and made you feel slightly ridiculous. You're standing over a trash can at 3 a.m., crushing ashes from burned paper, wondering if this is really what you thought intelligence work would be like when you joined the CIA. One officer in Vienna got lazy at destruction. He'd tear out the used pages and stuff them in his pocket, figuring he'd burn them later. Then he'd do laundry. And the cleaning lady at his boarding house found his pockets full of papers with random numbers on. Being a curious person, she asked him about it. "What are these papers with numbers? Are you doing mathematics homework?" "Yes," he said, thinking quickly. "Math homework. For a correspondence course. I'm studying mathematics. At your age? How wonderful. My son needs help with mathematics. Perhaps you could tutor him?" Now he was trapped. He had to maintain his cover story of being interested in mathematics, which meant meeting with the cleaning lady's son and pretending to help with homework, all while making sure the kid never saw his actual math homework, which was one-time pad pages that should have been burned weeks ago. He eventually burned all the pages properly this time, made up an excuse for why he couldn't continue tutoring. "My course ended," and filed a report. Operational security lapse corrected. Recommend refresher training on destruction protocols. The problem with distribution. Fourth problem, you had to get the one-time pads to your contacts in the first place, and they had to be identical pads, and they had to be distributed securely. Usually this meant physically carrying pads to contacts or leaving them at dead drops. You'd have a briefcase full of small pad booklets, each one labeled with codes indicating which operation it was for. Carrying around a briefcase full of encryption materials was risky. If you got searched by police, by counterintelligence, by random security checks, you'd have a lot of explaining. Why are you carrying 40 small notebooks full of random numbers? Is not a question with a good, innocent answer. I'm a mathematician. What kind of mathematics uses random numbers in small notebooks? Statistical mathematics. It's very specialized. You wouldn't understand. I have a mathematics degree from the University of Vienna. Well, it's American mathematics, different system. Not convincing, so officers got creative about transporting one-time pads, hidden in hollowed-out books, of course, sewn into coat linings, mailed in packages disguised as catalogs or magazines, delivered by courier using elaborate dead-drop chains. The pads themselves were made as small as thin paper, tiny printing, sometimes reduced to microfilm, that had to be read with magnification. This made them easier to hide, but harder to use. Try doing arithmetic from numbers you're reading through a magnifying glass while your hand is shaking and your eyes are tired. The problem with compromise. Fifth problem, if your one-time pad was compromised, if the enemy got a copy, your entire communication system with that contact was burned. Done. Finished. You had to destroy your pad, assume all previous messages were compromised, and establish a completely new system. This happened more often than you'd think. Pads got lost, pads got stolen, officers got arrested, and their pads were seized. Dead drops were discovered, and pads were compromised. Every time, it meant starting over. New pads had to be created, distributed, verified. It could take weeks to reestablish secure communication. And you never knew for sure if your pad was compromised. Maybe the enemy had it, maybe they didn't. You had to assume worst-case scenarios, burn everything, start over, just to be safe. I went through 4 complete pad changes during my time in Vienna. 4 times I had to destroy all my existing pads, receive new ones, verify they matched my contacts' pads, and reestablish communications. 4 times of weeks with no secure communications because we couldn't trust the old system. It was exhausting and nerve-wracking and made you very, very careful about pad security. The actually funny part, despite all these problems, one-time pads were the gold standard of Cold War encryption. They were genuinely unbreakable when used correctly. The Soviets used them. We used them. Everyone who needed truly secure communication used them. But the gap between used correctly and used in reality was enormous. There's a story, I can't verify if it's true, but it perfectly captures the absurdity, about a Soviet agent who was using one-time pads to communicate with Moscow. He was very security conscious, very careful. He kept his pads in a safe. He destroyed used pages meticulously. He never made arithmetic errors. His downfall? His wife used the one-time pad paper to write grocery lists. She didn't know what the pad was. She just saw a notebook of blank pages. She was looking at the blank sides and thought, perfect for my shopping list. By the time he discovered what she'd done, she'd used about 20 pages. 20 pages of one-time pad that Moscow Center had identical copies of, now covered with grocery lists. Bread, milk, eggs, potatoes, onions. He couldn't destroy the pages because they had grocery information he actually needed. He couldn't use those pages for encryption because they were compromised by groceries. He couldn't tell his wife what the pad was actually for because she didn't know he was a spy. He reportedly had a minor breakdown trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, he destroyed the pages, told his wife that notebook was special paper, his work, and please don't use it, bought a regular notebook for grocery lists, and filed a report to Moscow. Pages 4564, compromised. Recommend a new pad. Also recommend marriage counseling. Why we kept you. Despite all these problems, the arithmetic errors, destruction protocols, the synchronization issues, the compromise risks, the grocery list incidents, we kept using one-time pads throughout the Cold War because they worked. When used correctly, they were unbreakable, difficult to break, or would take years to break. Actually, mathematically, provably unbreakable. The Soviets couldn't decrypt our one-time pad messages. We couldn't decrypt theirs. It was perfect security. The price was tedium, complexity, and constant vigilance, but for truly critical communication, it was worth it. Modern encryption is easier, faster, more convenient, but it's also potentially breakable with enough computing power and time. One-time pads used correctly are unbreakable forever. Though I don't miss the 3 a.m. arithmetic sessions, the constant fear of being out of sync, or the elaborate pad destruction rituals, not even a little bit. Chapter 7, Disguises, or Why Most People Look Ridiculous in Fake Mustaches. Let's talk about disguises. Hollywood makes this look easy and glamorous. Someone puts on a wig and glasses, maybe adds a fake mustache, and suddenly they're unrecognizable. Mission Impossible makes it look like you can become anyone with the right mask. Reality? Most disguises made you look like you were either going to a costume party or having some kind of identity crisis. The basic problem with disguises. Here's what Hollywood doesn't tell you. Humans are really good at recognizing faces. Terrifyingly good. We're wired to notice faces and remember them. You can change someone's hair, add glasses, modify their appearance, and most people will still recognize them because recognition is based on underlying facial structure, proportion, the way someone moves and carries them. To truly disguise someone requires either A. Minor changes that make you less memorable but don't drastically alter appearance, useful for not being remembered, useless for disguising your identity from someone looking for you. B. Major changes that alter your appearance dramatically but are also obviously fake, useful for certain operations, useless for long-term cover. We mostly did option A, subtle changes that made you blend in, look ordinary, not stand out in people's memory. The subtle disguise kit, My standard disguise kit in the 1950s contained plain glasses, clear lenses, different frame styles, a reversible jacket, dark on one side, light on the other, a hat that could be worn or removed, different ties, a briefcase or bag that could be carried or not. That's it. No wigs, no fake mustaches, no elaborate makeup, just basic items that changed your silhouette and made you look different from different. The theory was, if someone saw me briefly, then I changed my appearance slightly, they'd have trouble recognizing if they saw me again. Not because I looked like a completely different person, but because their memory of what I looked like would be fuzzy enough that changes confused. This actually worked reasonably well for surveillance detection and breaking surveillance. You'd walk into a building wearing a dark jacket and hat, carrying a briefcase. You'd go into a bathroom, reverse the jacket, now light-colored, remove the hat, leave the briefcase in a locker, walk out, and surveillance watching the building would be looking for a guy in a dark jacket with a hat and briefcase. You, now in a light jacket without a hat or briefcase, wouldn't match their search image. Simple, effective, and most importantly, you didn't look ridiculous. The not-so-subtle disguise attempts. Then there were the operations that required more dramatic disguise. These went poorly. There was a plan, I was God, to disguise an American officer as a Soviet military officer so he could access a restricted area in East Berlin. The disguise was elaborate. Soviet uniform, authentic, stolen, or purchased. Proper insignia, military ID, forged, and some makeup to make him look more Eastern European. The officer practiced the disguise, practiced Russian phrases, practiced Soviet military bearing. Everything was planned carefully. He got through the first checkpoint fine. The guard saluted, checked his ID, forged but good, waved him through. He's thinking, this is working, I'm doing it. He got stopped at the second checkpoint by an older Soviet sergeant who looked at him and immediately said in Russian, "You're not me." "Yes, I am," he said, maintaining his cover. "I have orders to—" "No," the sergeant. "Military men walk differently, stand differently. You're pretending." "Who are you, really?" The officer's cover story immediately fell apart. The sergeant, having spent 30 years in the military, could spot a fake military bearing from 50 yards away. All the uniform details and forged documents didn't matter. The officer just didn't move like someone who'd been in the military for years. He managed to talk his way out, claimed he was a new officer, very nervous, this was his first real assignment, and the sergeant apparently decided that was plausible, and let him go with a warning to grow a spine. But the operation was blown. The officer had to abort and extract immediately, and the lesson was clear. You can look like someone, but if you don't move like them, act like them, have their mannerisms and bearing, people will notice. The wig incident. Wigs should be simple, right? Put on a wig, your hair looks different. Easy disguise. Wrong. Wigs in the 1950s were terrible. They looked like wigs. The hairline was wrong. The texture was wrong. They shifted on your head when you moved. In any kind of wind, they were at risk of just leaving. I witnessed a wig disaster in Vienna in 1957. An officer was wearing a wig as part of a disguise for meeting a contact. The wig was brown and curly. His actual hair was gray and straight. Decent enough disguise. He met the contact in a cafe. The meeting was going well. Then a door opened, causing a draft. The wig shifted. Not completely off. Noticed. The contact stared at his head. The officer reached up to adjust it, realized what he was doing, and tried to play it off as just adjusting his hair. The wig shifted more. Now it was definite, obvious. The contact, trying to be helpful, said quietly, "Your hair is... I think you should visit the bathroom." The officer excused himself, went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and saw that his wig was now sitting at approximately a 15-degree angle, making him look like he'd been in a windstorm or possibly a fight. He tried to adjust it, made it worse, eventually gave up, took it off, stuffed it in his pocket, and returned to the meeting, bald, well, with his actual gray hair. The contact didn't say anything. They completed the meeting professionally, but there was definitely a moment of, "We're both going to pretend that didn't happen." The officer filed a report. Wig proved unsuitable for operational use. Recommend discontinuing wig-based disguises. The fake mustache problem. Fake mustaches are a classic disguise element. They're also obviously fake about 90% of the time. The CIA's Technical Services Division produced elaborate fake mustaches, real hair professionally made, designed to be glued onto someone's face. Spirit gun. When applied correctly by someone who knew what they were doing, they looked reasonably convincing. When applied by a nervous field officer at 2 a.m. in a bathroom with shaky hands and inadequate lighting, they looked glued a small animal to your upper lip. The adhesive was also problematic. Sometimes it didn't stick well enough and the mustache would start to peel off the corners. Sometimes it stuck too well and removing it was like waxing your upper lip, painful, and left you looking red and irritated. One officer got his fake mustache stuck so well that he couldn't remove it for 3 days. He had to maintain his disguised appearance for 3 days because the spirit gum wouldn't come off. He showed up at the embassy with this mustache, and everyone knew it was fake, but he couldn't remove it, so he just had to wear it until the adhesive finally degraded enough to allow removal. His colleagues called him Tom Selleck for the rest of his career, which was unfortunate because this was 1958 and Tom Selleck wouldn't be famous for another 20 years. The nickname outlasted the context. The makeup that melted for operations requiring more dramatic appearance changes. We used theatrical makeup. This could change skin tone, add age lines, create shadows to change apparent facial structure. The problem? Makeup melts in heat, runs when you sweat, and smears when you touch your face, which you do unconsciously constant. An officer in Cairo climate, terrible choice for elaborate makeup disguises, was using makeup to appear older. Operation added gray to his hair, lines to his face, made himself look about 20 years older. He was outdoors in the Egyptian sun for maybe an hour. The makeup started melting, literally melting off his face. The carefully applied age lines turned into streaks. The gray in his hair was sweating out and dripping. Someone approached him, concerned. "Sir, are you all right? You're melting?" "It's fine. It's just the heat." "Should I call a doctor?" "You're actually melting." He had to abandon the operation and clean his face, looking like he'd been in some kind of bizarre accident. The makeup came off in patches, leaving him looking like a half-melted candle. Cairo Station sent a message to headquarters. "Request operations avoid extreme heat. Current disguise materials unsuitable for desert climates." Headquarters responded, "Noted. Would you prefer winter operations in Cairo? Would prefer operations that don't require makeup." What actually worked? Despite these disasters, some disguise techniques actually worked. Posture and bearing. Change how you walk, stand, and carry yourself. This is harder than it sounds, but more effective than fake mustaches. If you normally stand up straight, hunch slightly. If you normally walk quickly, slow down. If you normally make eye contact, avoid it. These changes how people perceive you without requiring props. Age adjustment. It's easier to appear older than younger. Gray hair, temporary subtle additions, slightly more worn clothing, slower movements, and you can pass for older. This was useful because older people attract less suspicion in many situations. Class changes. Dressing significantly above or below your normal social class changes how people see you. If you normally wear middle-class clothing, dress as a wealthy businessman or a laborer. People notice class markers more than they notice faces. Context changes. Being in an unexpected context changes recognition. If people expect to see you in one setting, office worker, seeing you in a completely different setting, construction site, makes recognition less likely even without disguise. These techniques didn't involve any props, makeup, or wigs that could fail. They just required observation, practice, and consistency. The philosophy of disguise. The best disguise wasn't about looking like someone else. It was about not being memorable at all. The goal was to be unremarkable, to blend into the background, to be the person nobody notices or remembers. This meant average clothing, not too nice, not too shabby, neutral colors, normal posture and movement, avoiding eye contact without being obviously avoidant, no distinctive features or accessories, appropriate dress for the context. You wanted to be the person someone saw but couldn't describe later. He was medium height, average build. I don't remember his face. It was just there. That's a successful disguise, not looking like someone else, looking like no one in particular. And that doesn't require fake mustaches, wigs, or elaborate makeup, just an understanding of human psychology and what people notice versus what they ignore. Though the fake mustache incidents remain legendary in CIA history, every training class heard about them as examples of what not to do. Don't be the guy whose mustache fell off during an operation became an actual piece of advice. Let me tell you about one of the most basic and somehow also most difficult techniques in espionage, the brush pass. Concept is simple. You and your contact pass each other in a public space. In the moment of passing, you transfer something, a document, a package, a message. It happens in a split second. To anyone watching, it looks like two strangers accidentally brush past each other. No conversation, no obvious interaction, who happen to be walking. In theory, elegant, covert. In practice, drop things, goes wrong. And occasionally you hand a classified document to a complete stranger by accident. The basic technique. Here's how a brush pass is supposed to work. Both parties approach from opposite directions. You're carrying the material to transfer in your hand, usually your right hand if you're right-handed, positioned naturally at your side. Your contact has their hand positioned similarly, empty and ready to receive. As you pass, make momentary contact. Your hands touch briefly, and in that split second, you transfer the item from your hand to theirs. Keep walking. Don't look back. Don't acknowledge anything happened. Total time. Maybe half a. We practiced this extensively in training. We'd walk past each other, transfer objects, walk away, do it again and again. Practice until it was smooth, natural, unconscious. Instructors would critique, too obvious, your hand moved too much, too slow, that took nearly a full second, too fast, you dropped the item. After dozens of practices, most of us could do it reasonably well in the training facility, under controlled conditions, with no stress. Then we tried it in the real world, discovered all the ways it could go wrong. The dropped package incident. My first attempt at brush pass in Vienna, 1950. I was transferring a small envelope of micro to a contact. We'd planned the pass carefully. Specific a busy shopping street, specific time, p.m., specific approach route. I walked toward the meeting point, envelope right hand, trying to look casual and natural. I saw my contact approaching from the other direction. Perfect timing. We're going to pass right at the designated spot. We pass. I extend my hand slightly for the transfer. He extends his. Our hands touch. I release the envelope. He doesn't grab it. The envelope falls to the ground. We both keep walking. That's protocol. You don't stop. You don't acknowledge anything wrong. But I'm internally panicking. The envelope is now on the ground, on a busy shopping street, with classified material inside. I stop about 20 yards later, pretend to look in a shop window and glance back. The envelope is still there. People are walking past it. Nobody's picked it up yet, but it's only a matter of time. My contact has also stopped, looking equally concerned. We make eye contact briefly. What do? Then a street sweeper comes by with his cart and broom. He sweeps up the envelope along with other debris and dumps it in his cart. Now our classified material is in a street sweeper's trash cart. I followed the sweeper for 3 blocks waiting for an opportunity. Finally, he stopped to empty his cart into a larger bin. When he wasn't looking, I quickly went through the trash, found the envelope, covered in cigarette butts and coffee grounds but intact, and pocketed it. The whole operation was a disaster. We'd compromised security, lost the material temporarily, and I'd gone dumpster diving to retrieve classified intelligence. Debrief with my handler. The pass was executed poorly. We'll practice more. Understatement of the year. The wrong person problem. Brush passes depend on 2 people being in the right place at exactly the right time. This requires precise timing, which humans are notoriously bad at. An officer in Berlin was shooting a brush pass. He was right on time, approaching the designated location. He saw someone approaching from the opposite direction. Same general build and appearance as his contact, same coat. He extended his hand, made the pass, kept walking. 2 blocks later, he realized that wasn't his contact. It was a completely random person who happened to look similar and be in roughly the right place at roughly the right time. He'd just handed classified material to a stranger. He stopped, turned around, tried to locate the person. Gone, vanished into the crowd. His actual contact showed up 30 seconds later at the correct location, looked around for him, didn't see him, and left. The officer had to file possibly the worst operational report ever. Material compromise, handed to unintended recipient. Current location, unknown. They never recovered the material. Presumably, some random Berliner went home that day with a small package and was very confused about what was inside and where it came from. The officer was reassigned to desk duty. His colleagues called him Wrong Guy Gary for the rest of his career. The collision problem. Brush passes require walking past each other with precise spacing. close enough to transfer, not so close that you actually collide. This is harder than it sounds in crowded urban environments or walking. I once attempted a brush pen at a crowded Vienna market. My contact and I approached each other. Perfect timing. We're about to pass. Then a woman with a baby carriage cuts between us at the last second. We both try to avoid the carriage. We both step in the same direction. We collide. Hard. I stumble. He stumbles. We both apologize profusely in German while trying not to drop the material supposed to sing him. The woman with the carriage gives us both disapproving looks. We're two clumsy idiots who can't watch where they're going. We separate, and I realize I still have the material. The pass didn't happen because we were too busy not falling over to execute the transfer. We had to circle around and try again, which was risky because now we'd drawn attention to ourselves. Second attempt worked, but sloppy and stressful. After that, I always checked for baby carriages before attempting brush pass. The seasonal problem, brush passes in winter, when everyone's wearing thick coats and gloves, are much harder than brush pass. Try transferring a small envelope while both people are wearing gloves. The envelope slips or sticks to one glove or gets lost in someone's coat pocket instead of their hand. The thick coats also make it harder to position your hands naturally. Everything's bunched up and awkward. Summer passes were easier, but presented a different problem. You're more visible. In winter, you're bundled up. Your hand movements are somewhat concealed by your coat. In summer, you're more exposed. Your arms and hands are more visible. It's easier for surveillance to see the transfer. We generally preferred spring or fall brush pass. Moderate clothing, reasonable weather, easier to maintain natural appearance while executing transfers. One winter pass in Vienna went wrong because both parties were wearing thick gloves. The officer tried to pass a small package. It stuck to his glove. He shook his hand, trying to release it. The package flew off his glove, sailed through the air, and landed in a snowbank. Both parties kept walking, protocol, while mentally cursing winter operations. The officer circled back 20 minutes later, found the snowbank, and spent 10 minutes digging through snow looking for a small package, trying to look like someone who'd lost their keys rather than someone recovering classified material. He found it eventually, frozen solid, had to thaw it out before he could deliver it. Headquarters sent a memo after that incident. When possible, avoid winter brush passes. When not possible, consider alternative transfer methods. What actually worked, despite these disasters, brush passes did work when executed properly, and properly meant extensive practice. The more you practiced, the more natural it became. Officers who did dozens of brush passes developed an instinct for timing, spacing, and transfer mechanics. Clear signals. We used prearranged signals to confirm readiness. A specific hand position, carrying a certain item, standing in a particular spot. These signals let both parties know, yes, we're doing this now. Backup plan. Always have a backup plan. If the pass fails, what's the next? Another location, different time, alternative transfer method. Never rely on a single attempt. Environmental awareness. Check the environment constant. Crowds, obstacles, surveillance, weather. All of these affect pass execution. Don't rigidly follow the plan if conditions have changed. Natural movement. The pass had to look natural. Two people walking normally who happened to brush past each. Any forced or artificial movement attracted attention. I eventually got decent at brush passes. Not great. Became one of those who could execute perfect passes under any conditions, but competent enough to complete operations without dropping things or handing classified material to random strangers. The key was accepting that it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't smooth Hollywood spy stuff. It was two people awkwardly bumping hands while trying to look natural, hoping nobody noticed, and occasionally failing in hilarious ways. But when it worked, when you transferred material successfully, contact clean, and completed the operation without compromising security, there was a real satisfaction. A simple, elegant solution, even if sometimes that solution involved fishing frozen packages out of snowbanks. Let's wrap this up by talking about why all these techniques, coins, invisible ink, dead drops, one-time disguises, brush pass, would largely fail in the modern world. Cameras are everywhere. In the 1950s, surveillance required human observation. Someone had to physically, they had to follow you in person. They had to be present to witness dead drops. This was resource-intensive. Even major intelligence services couldn't watch everyone all the time. There were gaps in coverage. If you were good at surveillance detection, you could find those gaps and operate safely. Today, cameras everywhere, Every street corner, every building, every store. Facial recognition technology, automatic license plate readers, your phone tracking your location constantly, digital breadcrumbs everywhere you go. That dead drop in Rock Creek Park? Multiple cameras would capture you accessing it. That brush pass on a busy street? Recorded from 6 different angles with facial recognition, identifying both participants. The beautiful thing about 1950s tradecraft was that it exploited gaps in surveillance coverage. Modern technology has eliminated most of those gaps. Communications are digital. One-time pads were necessary because physical messages had to be transported and could be intercepted. Modern encryption happens digitally, over networks, with keys that never physically exist in a form someone can steal. Is modern encryption as theoretically secure as one-time pads? No. Can it be? Potentially with enough computing power, but it's vastly more practical. You're not doing arithmetic at 2 a.m. You're not burning pad pages and crushing ashes. You're clicking send on an encrypted app and trusting mathematics. The trade-off? The convenience and speed of digital communication vastly outweigh the theoretical cryptographic superiority of one-time pads. Biometric identification disguises worked in an era when identification was mostly visual. Someone looked at your face, compared it to a photo ID, and made a judgment. Today, fingerprints, iris scans, facial recognition, DNA analysis. You can change your appearance all you want. Wear wigs, make mustaches, alter your posture, but your biometric identifiers remain the same. Modern espionage can't rely on physical disguises the way we did. The technology has moved beyond what human observation could defeat. Data analysis. In the 1950s, intelligence analysis was manual. Analysts read reports, looked at photographs, made connections by hand. There was a limit to how much data could be processed. Today, computers analyze billions of data points instantly. Pattern recognition algorithms find connections humans would never spot. Someone servicing dead drops repeatedly would be identified through pattern analysis of movement data, camera footage, and communication patterns. The old techniques relied on operating below the threshold of what human analysts could detect. Modern AI analysis has no such thing. Why we should be grateful. You might think I'm nostalgic for the old days, not even a little bit. The modern world is better in almost every way. Intelligence officers today have tools we couldn't have imagined. Secure communications that work instantly across the globe. Technology that makes operations safer and more effective. Support systems that protect officer well-being. Yes, the romantic era of Cold War espionage is gone. No more hollow coins. No more invisible ink. No more elaborate dead drops in cemeteries. But modern intelligence work is more effective, more ethical, and less likely to get people killed through simple operational mistakes. I'll take modern technology over dead drops and one-time pads any day, even if it means no more stories about officers accidentally giving Clyde material to street sweepers. What remains the same? Some things haven't changed. Human intelligence still matters. No amount of technology replaces human source. Someone still needs to recruit assets, maintain relationships, assess motivation. That's still human work. Operational security still matters. The principles of security, trust no one, verify everything, assume you're being watched, these remain true even if the specific techniques have changed. Judgment still matters. Technology provides information and tools, but humans still make decisions. Knowing when to act, who to trust, how to handle complex situations, that's still human judgment. Stories still get told. Even today, intelligence officers somewhere are having operations go wrong in hilarious ways. They're making mistakes, improvising solutions, dealing with unexpected problems. The specific details change, but the fundamental human comedy of espionage continues. In 50 years, someone will write about how primitive 2020's era encryption was, how quaint our cyber tradecraft seems, how they can't believe we relied on such basic technology, and they'll be right. Technology evolves. Techniques evolve. What seems sophisticated now will seem primitive eventually, but people will still be making the same fundamental mistakes, dropping things during transfer, forgetting passwords, the modern equivalent of getting out of sync with one-time pads, trusting the wrong people, occasionally handing sensitive material to the wrong recipient. Because espionage is ultimately a human endeavor conducted by imperfect people under stress, trying to accomplish difficult things with whatever tools they have available. We just had really weird tools, and sometimes those tools were fake dog waste or grocery list, compromised one-time pads or wigs that fell off at inopportune moments. But we made it work, mostly, sort of, when we got lucky. And that's really the lesson here. Intelligence work has always been partly skill, partly preparation, partly improvisation, and largely hoping things don't go catastrophic wrong. Sometimes they went catastrophically wrong anyway, but enough things went wrong that we won the Cold War, defeated Soviet communism, and made the world safe enough that people like you can read stories about our mishaps and be glad you weren't there. You're welcome for the victory. Sorry about all the stories involving fake dog waste. I'm sitting in my suburban Philadelphia living room, 74 years old, telling these stories to my grandchildren. Well, writing them down anyway. The grandkids find some of them entertaining. Tell us about the pigeon money again, Grandpa. And some boring. Why did you spend so much time walking around? My wife, who tolerated decades of unexplained absences and cryptic phone calls, just shakes her head when I tell these stories. You never told me about the fake dog waste. Some things you don't tell your spouse, I report. Daniel, we've been married for 52 years. I think I can handle fake dog waste stories. Some trauma should remain private. The hollow quarter is still in my desk drawer. The fake rock is in my garage. The one-time pads were all destroyed decades ago properly and thoroughly. No grocery lists involved. Sometimes I run into other retired officers. We trade stories. Everyone has a worst brush pass story. Everyone has a dead drop disaster story. Everyone has at least one story involving wildlife interfering with operation. We laugh about it now. At the time, it was terrifying and stressful. But decades later, safe and retired, we can appreciate the absurdity. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. Intelligence work continued, but differently, with new threats and new techniques. The elaborate tradecraft we developed became obsolete, replaced by digital encryption and cyber operation. But the stories remain. The lessons remain. The fundamental truths about human nature, operational security, and the constant comedy of things going wrong, those remain. If you take anything from these stories, let it be. Be grateful for the technology you have. Be grateful for the security you enjoy. Be grateful that you don't need to hide secrets in fake dog waste or spend hours doing arithmetic for one-time pad encryption. And maybe, just maybe, think twice before you complain about two-factor authentication or strong password because I promise you, those are vastly easier we dealt with. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go. My coffee's getting cold. Actual good coffee, not the terrible Vienna cafe stuff. And there's a new spy thriller I want to watch. These modern fictional spies always get the tradecraft wrong. Nobody ever drops anything during brush passes. Nobody's one-time pad gets used for grocery lists. Nobody's disguise falls apart. Where's the realism? Where's the authenticity? But I'll watch anyway, because even bad spy fiction is entertaining when you've lived the real thing. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, if someone hands you a hollow coin, check before spending it. You never know what might be inside.